Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to say a special thank you to Mayor Brian Bowman for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks.
We know that Manitobans are looking forward to a long weekend, a special one, a holy weekend for many Manitobans, and it's a time when many of our families will get together for family dinners and gatherings. This year we want them to be smaller. And I want to start off with an important message for all Manitobans. Please, stay home. Stay home and stay safe. This is not the time for large family gatherings. Je veux commencer par un message important. S'il vous plaît, restez à la maison. Ce n'est pas le moment de grandes réunions de famille ou une petite vacance. Don't risk making this weekend's Easter dinner a celebration with fewer people around the kitchen table next year. Do not do that. The vast majority of Manitobans are doing just what the doctor ordered, and that is important. And to them I say thank you. Sadly, there is a small minority of people who are not doing their part, and they continue to ignore the advice of public health experts, of the mayor, of myself, of many, many others. And they put their own health and the health of all Manitobans at risk. So today we are announcing new measures for people who disregard the emergency orders made under the Public Health Act and the Emergency Measures Act. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons de nouvelles amendes pour les personnes qui ne respectent pas les ordonnances d'urgence rendues en vertu de la loi sur la santé publique et de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence. We want to make sure that there is a deterrent for people who are placing others at risk by thoughtlessly not abiding by social distance rules. There will be active efforts to educate the public, as there have been and as there will continue to be. But at the end of the day, it is apparent that enforcement is needed as well. These are necessary steps to protect all of us. On the enforcement front, we are announcing today an important partnership between initially Manitoba Justice and the City of Winnipeg. We're taking a cooperative approach to our enforcement strategies. Nous adoptons une approche dure sur le point de notre stratégie d'application. To support these efforts, Manitoba Justice is partnering with the City of Winnipeg to create enforcement rules and enforcement units in Operation Safe Apart. These units will be dedicated to enforcing orders, along with providing awareness and prevention, responding to complaints, and supporting community safety officers and bylaw officers. I want to say thank you to Manitobans who have been calling into the city and calling into our information contacts as well in partnering to do the best that we can do and that they can do to assist in the health and well-being of themselves and others. I want to say again, welcome to Mr. Mayor. Thank you for being here, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Premier. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to join you here today. I want to begin just by acknowledging that we're on Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. I want to start by giving a really big shout out to the incredible members of our public service and Manitoba's public service who've been working around the clock to keep services moving. And I want to, of course, thank the Premier for his ongoing leadership and efforts. We've all been glued to our TVs and our computer screens watching daily updates from Dr. Brent Rusin and Lynette Saragusa. I want to specifically thank them for their strength, their dedication, and humility during this pandemic. I think they've been working 24 hours a day for the last number of months, including through weekends. We're very fortunate to have them. And I want them to know we're extremely grateful for their tireless work that they're putting in that's providing assistance to Winnipeggers. I'd also like to thank Jay Shaw. He's the head of our emergency operations at the City of Winnipeg's team, and thank him for his ongoing leadership and contributions to today's announcement. He's been an instrumental part of the city's response and deserves a lot of credit for what the work that he's leading. I also want to give a big shout out to all of the members of our community who are staying home, who are practicing physical distancing if they have to go out, and respecting the measures that have been enacted by our provincial government. It's a very surreal time right now that we're all living through, and we're navigating, and we know it's difficult. It's been incredibly heartwarming to see our community pulling together to help each other out and do their part to stay home. And I want to say thank you. And while almost all are doing their part, there is a small segment of our community that's not getting the message. With Easter weekend upon us, a time that's typically set aside for gatherings in our community, I want to renew the calls to respect the public health orders. The measures put in place by the Manitoba government and the corresponding measures we've enacted at the city are there for the safety of all in our community. Not some, all. For those who are still not getting the message, we've reached a point where the continued violations of these measures needs to stop. As many of you will know, I've been privately and publicly advocating for stronger provincial enforcement measures. I'm very pleased the Premier is announcing these measures today, and I want to say thank you to Premier Pallister. As I've indicated, we're in full support, and we have been, and we're willing to do our part as a municipal government. Starting Saturday, we'll be initiating a community service ambassador program that will get ambassadors out in the community to look for, to help educate, and create awareness to those who are not respecting the public health directions. This includes closed city areas like athletic fields, skate parks, play structures, and picnic shelters. It's important to note these ambassadors will not be handing out tickets. If these ambassadors are unsuccessful in dispersing people from these areas, we'll be utilizing our bylaw enforcement officers to start warning and ticketing those who will be making use of the closed city facilities with penalties of up to $1,000 and the potential of up to 6 months imprisonment. These measures will support and complement the enforcement measures enacted by the province once their legislative changes are addressed next week. The bylaw enforcement officers will likely expand their activities across the city. I also understand, as the Premier's indicated, Manitoba Justice is in ongoing dialogue with enforcement agencies such as the Winnipeg Police Service to enhance enforcement. As many of you know, health is an area of provincial responsibility, but during this pandemic, and as always, we absolutely have to. In fact, our citizens expect us to be working together, and we are. we're demonstrating today our municipal government's prepared to support the provincial efforts in a meaningful way. And of course, we trust provincial government in due course will provide financial assistance to the City of Winnipeg for those health-related services that we're undertaking on their behalf. We don't take this step lightly. However, those who are not getting the message are putting others at risk and undermining the incredible work of so many in our community. And I want to stress that I'm still hopeful that it doesn't come to requiring enforcement. I think we'd all prefer to get full community buy-in, and enforcement wouldn't be needed. But if it is needed, these measures will help keep Winnipeggers, in fact Manitobans, safe. And I want to just conclude by underscoring the messaging from our Premier and from public health officials of the importance to stay home. I know this weekend with Passover and with Easter, a time that we typically get together with family and friends, I want to just underscore the urgent need for people to stay home, find alternate ways of connecting, whether it's on FaceTime or Zoom or just over the phone. Do what you can to protect the health and safety of not only yourself and your family, but our community. And I want Winnipeggers to know that all levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal governments, are collaborating and are working diligently to protect their health and well-being at this time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Premier.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks again, not only to Brian, but to all our local municipal governments and the representatives that are serving there. I think in the midst of this pandemic, there's a danger that we forget that these local governments are delivering services on many, many other fronts in addition to those directly related to the pandemic, and they have stepped up. They have demonstrated their willingness to serve the people of their jurisdictions very, very well, and I think that they've impressed all of us. Speaking of impressed, I want to say also for the record that we have had virtually no complaints about small businesses. And I want to emphasize in particular our thanks to them. Many of these small businesses are suffering tremendously right now. Many who work in them have lost their jobs or have seen reduced hours, and paychecks matter to people. And so for all of us, we need to appreciate and I think say thank you to the mostly family-run small businesses around our province. The reality is they're our foundation of our economy, and they are in distress right now. And so thank you to them for stepping up and helping. They are tremendous. We have taken some significant steps specifically for small businesses and their employees and their families in the last number of days and weeks. And I know that Manitobans support those measures because they understand how critically important small businesses are to our province. So we are going to continue to do so as we invest more today and tomorrow in very significant ways in things like procuring online, or not online all, but procuring important frontline goods and services, and also making significant additional investments, as we announced yesterday, for example, in research. In saying this, I am making sure Manitobans understand that although we are, all of us, up to our armpits and alligators right now, we are not ignoring the longer term. And we are very, very interested in making sure that we make the steps, take the steps necessary to protect people today, but also to protect our province and our services as we move forward as well. We have made literally hundreds of millions of dollars available as a province in just the last 3 weeks, and I would say it is very clear that next week we are going to have to make even more resources available, and that will happen when we reconvene our legislature on Wednesday, I anticipate. Our House leaders are in discussion as we speak, so there'll be more I expect to report on that later today. I've used the analogy before because I come from a sports background. You don't learn about your team so much in easy times, but you do learn about your team in challenging times. And what I'm learning is that our people in Manitoba want to work together and are. They're stepping up and they're demonstrating the quality that I think is not exclusive to Manitoba, but I think very much a source of pride for us in Manitoba. We're stepping up and we're helping each other in the thousands. We're volunteering. We're doing the things necessary to keep each other safe and ourselves safe. And so today is a bit of a sad course of action made necessary by the very, very few in our province, to the 99th percentile and plus. I want to say thank you, and I know the Mayor would agree 100%, say thank you to Manitobans for their wonderful qualities. We look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. A reminder to reporters, you have a primary question and one follow-up question. From the Canadian Press, Steve.
Oh, hi, Steve Lambert from the Canadian Press. We just got handed a release that said the fine is about $480-some for individuals and a little over $2,000 for businesses. But the mayor just said the fine was $1,000. So I'm just seeking some clarity as to what is the set fine limit and whether there's a range or it's a preset amount.
Sure, I can start with that. I mean, yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. It's good to hear from you. So we're using our existing parks bylaw to empower our bylaw enforcement officers to impose fines of up to $1,000. There's other levers that the province currently has that allow for other kinds of enforcement. Our enforcement at present can occur on city-owned spaces. And so that's where the collaboration with the province has been incredibly important leading up to today, and why doing the appropriate due diligence so that there was a thoughtful plan that was coordinated between the province and the city of Winnipeg was so important. There are other bylaw officers at the provincial level that have different powers in different spaces, and that's what we've coordinated.
Okay, and as a follow-up question for both of you, have you given any thought, in some jurisdictions, parks are closed, campgrounds are closed, our camping season starts in just under a month. So for both of you in your respective park spaces, are you considering closing them altogether?
We've actually launched, we're launching a number of committees of study to prepare for the best, as well as doing the initial responses of responding to what is less than the best right now. So in that, we have already a committee underway led by MLAs Wayne Owasco, Rick Wochuk, that will be working with industry representatives and private sector as well, owners, because we have many private sector campgrounds around the province that will be profoundly impacted as we move forward, in consultation with Dr. Roosen to advise them on planning as we move forward week by week and into what we hope will be a wonderful spring and summer. So that planning is underway right now, and I can only assure Manitobans that it is not exclusive to that industry. We are also working with chambers of commerce, business associations. The Manitoba Federation of Independent Business has been wonderful in supporting us with ideas and suggestions as well. I could mention them, and the Business Council of Manitoba also has provided us with very good input, and we're working in partnership with various trade and business associations as well to position ourselves so that as improvements are made, as better outcomes occur, we can strategize to make sure Manitoba is on the rebound economically and socially as well.
I can maybe just add to that in terms of city parks. The short answer is yes. I mean, there's been consideration of a lot of administrative changes. We're hoping that that's not necessary because, you know, it's the catch-22 governments are in right now. On one hand, we're saying go home, but on the other hand, we're trying to provide space so that when people do need to leave, they have safe spaces that they can spread out. And so we've closed a number of streets, for example, that are typically just closed on Sundays during the summer. But our parks also, we want to let people have space so that they can physically distance from each other. On the other hand, we've closed playgrounds and skate parks, places where we know people congregate in close proximity. And so we'll continue to monitor. Obviously, the community service ambassadors will be out this weekend, and they will be educating, and they'll be proactively looking for groups or gatherings in our parks and elsewhere in the community where people are not respecting the physical distancing orders from the province. And so, you know, the vests that people, these ambassadors will be wearing will be blue. I've assured the Premier, and I want to assure the media, that these are not blue because of any party affiliation. There's a lot of orange vests out there at the regular times, but these are city vests, so they'll be very visible wearing safety vests that are blue, and they'll be out there conducting themselves in a safe manner in our parks and elsewhere in the community.
I should also add to the question that parks facilities will be communal facilities like washrooms, play structures and so on will be closed later today.
From City News, Jonas.
Good morning, guys. Jonas Gilbart, City News. Just confirming, these new enforcement measures will only apply to groups larger than 10. The current Public Health Act enforcement that is in place. This isn't like a family out for a walk or anything like that. No,
let's be clear. We're not doing anything here except adhering to the recommendations from the public health advisors that we have and that we respect very much, and the Mayor thanked previously, and I thank again. But we have to understand, too, that we're dealing with a pandemic of historic proportions that is unprecedented, and so there may be necessary changes or modifications in the interests of public health as we move forward.
And as far as the logistical timeline, there was a mention earlier of maybe having to pass new laws. When will this actually be on the books here in Manitoba?
Wednesday, with the cooperation of the opposition parties, we'll be moving to do some codification, clarification further on this issue. But of course, the deterrent measures we're talking about today are going to continue to be important. I would also emphasize, though, that to the 99.9 percentile, the education that the Mayor emphasized earlier is the key. Exchanging information with Manitobans and making sure that you repeat those messages about proper conduct, about proper hand washing, about proper social distancing, and you name it. That's the preventative measure that works. This is a secondary measure made necessary by those who fail to understand how important they are to themselves and to others around them.
I'll just add to that in terms of city. I mean, the fines and the penalties that can be imposed for those that are not complying with public health orders, specifically where we've closed playgrounds, where we've closed skate parks, that's effective immediately. And so as of right now, if folks are not respecting those closures, they can be penalized up to $1,000. Worst case scenario, and I would be shocked if this is ever necessary. There's imprisonment up to 6 months. But as the Premier's indicated, kind of that first level is really education, and that's where media come in. And I want to thank you for all the reporting and work you are all doing, and those that are tuning in. It's really getting that message out. And so the ambassadors, they will be out in the community on Saturday and beyond, and we'll work collaboratively with the province following their legislative actions at the legislature next week to ensure that we are as aligned as possible and we're working collaboratively to support their efforts. And that's what today is demonstrating.
From the Winnipeg Free Press, Carol.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Premier. It's Carol Sanders at the Free Press. I'm wondering about the ambassadors. How many of them will there be? Will they be multilingual, or what can you tell us about the ambassadors? Who are they?
The ambassadors are we're starting with community services staff, but we're also redeploying staff within the public service. And so our corporate communications can be available to you after this press conference and later today to provide you with a little bit more granular detail. But there'll be a sizable number. If my memory is correct, we are expecting up to 48 to be deployed. And it could be more than that throughout our community. But again, if most Winnipeggers, as they're doing right now, are staying home, we're hoping that they don't have a lot of education that they actually need to do. But they're going to be out there beginning Saturday.
As a follow-up, Mr. Premier, Mr. Mayor, you've had your differences in the past. How would you describe your ability to work together in this fight against the pandemic?
Well, it's a love-in.
Yeah. I'll just say, you know what, we both have the same name, so there's a lot we share, and we've shared since birth. And so, you know what, we've done some good work together before this pandemic. We're going to do a lot of good work afterwards, and right now, our officials and we individually are doing our part to provide the leadership that our community expects. And I want to thank the Premier for his leadership and his efforts and that of his officials. And we're going to be there to support each other right now, as all Winnipeggers are doing with each other.
I just would have to say, though, in fairness, Carol, if two people are always thinking exactly the same way, one of them isn't thinking. And you have two representatives of the people here who agree on most things, and when we disagree, we do that when we talk to each other. So I would just have to say, too, that when we agree, I rarely ever have seen that in any media publication. I'm not sure why, but that would be, I think, something you could ask yourselves.
There's so many places I could take this. How long do we have?
From Global, Brittany.
Good morning, Brittany from Global News. Mayor Bowman, you said up to 48 community ambassadors could be used during this process. I'm wondering if either of you could tell us how many bylaw officers, conservation officers, people of that regard could be out issuing tickets when that is what happens.
I'm going to address that, Brittany, by saying that for security measures to work, it would be unwise for either of us to get into specific details about any aspect of this. I would tell those who are so disrespectful of the rest of us to understand that they'll be everywhere, in every neighborhood, everywhere you are, and that you'd better change the way you've been behaving, and you better do it now, or you're going to be lighter in the pocketbook very, very soon.
And my follow-up would be, at what point are we going to start seeing police officers be used in this regard? Is that something that is going to happen at all?
I can just say I understand that there's dialogue between Manitoba Justice and our Winnipeg Police Service. I spoke with our Chief of Police earlier today. I spoke with him yesterday as well, and I want to thank him and the members of our Winnipeg Police Service for their efforts. They will engage in discussions that may impact operations with Manitoba Justice directly, and that's not something that's being directed by City Hall. Certainly today's announcement isn't empowering or making any requirements to them that would impact operations, but they will continue to have the dialogue with Manitoba Justice and follow developments, of course, next week at the legislature. And certainly I want to just take this opportunity to thank them for their efforts. And again, that is a kind of an additional level that hopefully isn't necessary. The education is tier 1. Tier 2 is bylaw enforcement that both the province and the city are announcing today, and law enforcement at that level is something that would be extreme, and I hope it's not necessary.
From the Brandon Sun, Bud.
Good afternoon, Bud Robinson, the Brandon Sun. Hello, Mr. Premier. My question is, I can see how this would work in Winnipeg and Brandon, other large communities that have bylaws. How do you see this working in small rural communities, enforcement of this?
Well, but I would say this, the structures we're going to be clarifying even further in the coming days are designed to assist rural communities as well as the City of Winnipeg, as well as northern communities and Indigenous communities. And so the question of how effectively that can be done in a very, in a very small community like you and I grew up in is a fair question. I would remind citizens, though, of the province that this is a shared obligation too, in particular not on the policing side, but on the education and information side. And if you see people that are being disrespectful, you have every right to raise the issue with them directly. And if you see, for example, I've said this before, we haven't had cases, our business community's been wonderful, but if someone is flaunting the rules, a business person, you have every right to report that to us, but you also have the right to tell your friends that that's not a place that you should be honoring with your purchases. These measures are in addition to what any government can do, and in some cases I think probably at least as effective or perhaps more effective than we can do. We're all in this together. Every one of us is impacted, and we will beat this thing by facing it together, and that is essential at this point, and it always will be.
I'll just.
Are you expecting the I'm sorry, are you expecting
Yeah,
the RCMP to...
I'm sorry, I cut you off, but if I can maybe just add to what the Premier said, and sorry to have cut you off there. What I'll just say is, introducing measures like fining people up to $1,000 or even discussing possible imprisonment up to 6 months when it relates to playgrounds and skate parks is not something any mayor or premier, for that matter, wants to announce. This is not what you aspire to do when you enter public service, is to tell people not to go to public playgrounds, places of joy and places of community. And so these measures aren't being done to gain popularity or anything like that, because they won't. But if you have to tell people in your community, if you see people in a city-owned park or play structure where they're not abiding by the public health orders, and you want to blame either Brian, do it if it's going to help protect the health and safety of our citizens. And that's where I want to amplify what the Premier is saying, is there's a role for all of us, and the vast majority of Winnipeggers are acting very responsibly. They're in their homes, they're respecting the health orders, but they can play a role also if you see something that you know isn't being recommended or ordered right now. You can respectfully and engaging in physical distancing, you can do your part. And we're really calling on everybody. This is a shared effort, provincial, municipal, and citizen-centered way of battling a virus that doesn't care about jurisdictions, doesn't care about age, demographics, all those things. It can impact all of us.
Okay. And my follow-up to the Premier was, the provincial measures don't mention imprisonment as the city. Is that something you're not considering then, imprisonment?
We're serious about these deterrents. We're saddened by the necessity to pursue them. We're committed to doing what is necessary to protect the health and well-being of all of us. And I would re-emphasize the earlier comment in respect of the shared obligations we all have to do what's right for each other. If you have something to report, we have been privy to good information from citizens, and we will be focusing initially at least some of the efforts on deterrence as a response to the suggestions that Manitobans have given us. Call Manitoba Government Inquiry Line at 204-945-3744 or email at mgi@gov.mb.ca. We appreciate your help. Thank you.
From CJOB, Diana.
Good afternoon, Diana from 680 CJOB. I know these measures you are announcing today are for policing things like gathering sizes and using playgrounds that are closed. But will ambassadors also be checking for people who aren't social distancing acceptably? So if a group of 2 or 3 people are walking in a park together, will ambassadors be asking, are these people members of the same household, or is it just going to be those larger groups? Because I know obviously the messaging right now is not to gather with people outside your household.
The short answer is they will be trying to educate everyone citywide. And so our bylaw enforcement efforts will be focused on city assets and city properties that are closed. But our this community service ambassador team will be educating and helping educate people citywide, including in parks. And they're also, I want to thank, Jay Shaw has been working with our team to ensure that their safety is being protected when they're out in the community. And so they will be prepared with scripts and educational information that they can provide to people. And I'm sure if you have further questions on that, we can follow up with you afterwards.
And the province and the city are coordinating that effort, so those are approaches that will be relatively uniform regardless of jurisdiction.
And my follow-up, Mr. Premier, you mentioned that small businesses have not been the subject of any complaints with social distancing. What about larger businesses? Are you able to speak to any kind of education or enforcement the province has had to do with larger businesses so far?
I can tell you that the response from the business community, large, small, middle-sized, has been remarkable, and that we're very thankful. But of course, these penalties will be relevant to businesses that change that approach. And I will say this, it is our hope, of course, that we can move into a recovery stage. And so looking ahead, it is also important that these deterrents continue to be followed, because there is ample evidence elsewhere that there's been a ripple effect, even when COVID has been supposedly flattened, that it can resurge. And so we have to bear that in mind as well. We're not out of the woods here yet. Our numbers give some people very good hope and optimism, and that's good, and that's deserved. We want people to be hopeful. We want people to be optimistic. But based on the actual realities elsewhere, we need to remember that we're in a marathon here. It's not a sprint, and we have to keep doing the fundamentals properly, as we all emphasize day after day. So follow those fundamentals, protect one another. We'll get through this, but we need to be steadfast, and we need to work together now.
From the Winnipeg Sun, Josh.
Good afternoon. This is Josh Aldridge with Winnipeg Sun. The delay on a lot of this sounds like it's been making sure that there were no constitutional issues on it. What were some of the constitutional concerns you had? And to that point, is there going to be an appeal process for anybody fined for failing to maintain social distancing? And what does that look like when a lot of the courts are kind of shutting down and only doing urgent matters? What's that process going to look like? Okay,
let's be frank. We'll have lots of time to do all the process debates on everything we're doing right now in the middle of this pandemic, but we're focused on making sure people don't get COVID. And we want people to not give it to each other. And we want people to respect each other. So let's keep our eye on the ball right now. That's what we're going to do. On the issue of constitutionality, I will simply say to you, Josh, I have tremendous belief that our charter and its freedoms are precious things, and we are always reluctant, as the mayor alluded to earlier, to infringe on the freedoms of law-abiding people. But what used to be normal and acceptable a couple of months ago in our city and province isn't now. And so we have to understand that, and we have to change, and we have to do it now. And we'll save lives doing it. It's not every generation that has a chance to save lives, but we have a chance to do it now if we respect each other and if we're willing to adapt and to listen. So that's exactly what these measures are about today. It's about governments adapting, and it's about people adapting right along with us, and most of you are, so thank you so much for doing that.
Okay, my follow-up is looking at these ambassadors and bylaw officers. Are they going to be armed with PPE, or are they going to have any extra protections for themselves out there if they're out there dealing with the public? And there could be some confrontations if people don't like them coming up to them and educating or trying to enforce these measures. What protections are in place for them?
I'll let Jay Shaw speak to that, and our corporate communications can provide you with that. That has been a topic of conversation, and I've been assured that their health and safety is being protected in the deployment. And so we can provide you with additional detail. I know, even on the issue of, this morning I was speaking with Jay Shaw and asking, okay, are they going to be handing out, for example, written information? The short answer is we're trying to avoid that, because then you got to actually get within the physical distancing requirements in order to do that. So that's why the primary method of communications for those in person will be just be verbal, and it will be from a safe distance. And so, but like I said, our corporate communications can provide you with a little bit more granular detail to that question afterwards, if you'd like.
From CBC Radio Canada, Patrick.
Bonjour, Patrick Foucault from Radio Canada. Will we make sure that Winnipeggers who speak French and want to be approached in French, will they be able to speak in their preferred language with the ambassadors and the bylaws officers?
Toujours. Certainement.
Will they be, so does that mean every ambassador will be bilingual? Is that what it means?
No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean we're very sensitive to the multicultural and ethnic nature of one of the most diverse parts of the country of Canada. And so, of course, in the initial phases and on an ongoing basis, we're respectful of that reality. As far as making every language service available, that is unrealistic as a proposition right now, but it is always in our mind. The respectful nature of the relationship we have with the people of Manitoba is very important to us.
Thank you, Pallister. And I'm not sure if the next answer has been answered. If so, I'm sorry, I apologize. But let's say we have this weekend someone who suspects his neighbor is holding a party with more than 10 people. Are you recommending they call the police to tell their neighbor?
I'm recommending they call the Manitoba Government Inquiry Line at 204-945-3744, or email mgi@gov.mb.ca.
From 102.9 CHTM, Navi.
Good afternoon, Navi Ball with CHTM. Mr. Premier, I know you've mentioned multiple times that it's important for people to stay home, but are there still concerns about people traveling either within the province or outside the province for the long weekend?
Most certainly there are, Navi, and this is why we'll continue to urge people to do the right thing, the respectful thing for themselves, for others. I would suggest to family members who may be thinking that it would be fair to exclude themselves from such suggestions or rules. I would ask them to ask themselves how they would feel if a few weeks from now one of their family members was to contract COVID, and to make sure that that is not something they allow to happen as a consequence of a short-term decision. So this is a hardship, I understand that. Many families are suffering, many families are stressed, many families want to get together desperately right now, especially now. But to protect one another is our first and foremost obligation, so please, adhere to these recommendations. Do this. We'll have much to celebrate in the years ahead. Don't destroy the chance for such a celebration with a short-term decision that could be, frankly, very, very dangerous or fatal to someone you love.
And to follow up on today's announcement, I know it's for Winnipeg, but in the coming days when you announce the rural and northern municipal enforcement measures, would there also be a similar fine system, or would that be dependent on each individual municipality's bylaws? How would that sort of work?
No, Navi, that'll depend on provincial rules to a great degree. There are some potential different rules within municipalities, that's true, but the relevant guidance here is uniform, and we will endeavor to make sure that it, as much as possible, is uniform throughout the province naturally, because that is how we'll generate greater respect for adhering to the rules and the consequences of them.
From CBC Manitoba, Bart.
Bart the CBC. Mr. Mayor, the redeployment of dormant community service employees as community ambassadors for this purpose makes sense. At what point, as this pandemic continues, will the City of Winnipeg begin to contemplate temporary layoffs for staff that are not working or able to work?
Well, Bartley, good to hear from you. I know other municipalities have acted pretty quickly in terms of layoffs. I'm pleased that to date we have not laid anyone off, and our first preference, of course, is to redeploy, and that's what's occurring here today. I know a number of our staff, with the cooperation and the collaboration with CUPE, have been redeployed to places like Winnipeg Harvest. And so there's obviously a lot of work that has to happen in the coming weeks with the appropriate dialogue and oversight of council. But we're certainly we're not announcing anything today, and my hope is that we don't have to go there.
Okay, and also, Mr. Mayor, could you please clarify? I mean, you have using the parks bylaw for up to 1,000. Are you saying that if there are violations outside of parks, it will only be the $200 limit, and if it's on a park, it'll be 1,000? Can you clear up the confusion within the City of Winnipeg about the potential fines?
Sure, and corporate communications can provide you with a little bit more detail, but our bylaw enforcement officers have power right now under the existing bylaw, and so we're leveraging that as best we can. The ambassadors are going to be deployed citywide, however, even in areas that could potentially even be provincial public spaces. So schools is a good example. Had a member of council raise that issue with me this morning, and they can get out there and they can educate, and that's our first preference. But we can get you some additional detail on the specific bylaws and details that you're asking for today.
I could add to that, Bartley, if you like. We'll bring formalization of this forward next week. What we're suggesting is a two-tiered structure which would have individual fines at approximately $500 and corporate fines at significantly more.
From CTV Winnipeg, Jeff.
Oh, hi, gentlemen. Jeff from CTV. And following up a little bit on what Bart asked, I do have a little clarification question here. I just want to be clear. The parks bylaw, when we're talking about fines, will be used when we're talking about city assets like city parks. I get that. But for everything else, like a school playground, maybe a church congregation, or what the provincial fine that's what will be levied for everything outside of city assets. Have I got that right? Is it that separation?
500 for individual, and I think we're looking at 5,000 for corporate beginning next week. I'm sorry, 2,500, not 5,000 for corporate.
Okay, and why, I guess, a strategy from within the City of Winnipeg, and then one from the province, and then why not just the province have the fines and the strategy overall? Why is there this partnership here? Why not just the province? Here's the set fines for everybody.
Well, because we're going to be implementing this with the cooperation and support of other parties in the House next week, because the mayor is forced in the interim period to work with the existing rules as they are, and I've given you the clarity around where we're going to go as of next Wednesday.
I'll just add to that, Jeff. I mean, we're both leveraging the authority and the levers that we have right now to act in a timely way, recognizing that there's additional work that's required legislatively. But what we're trying to do is primarily educate people, and so hopefully the sticker shock of $1,000 and potential imprisonment is enough for people, the very few people who need to get this message, to get the message today. And of course, CTV and others can help broadcast that today. But we're doing the best we can in a timely way with the levers that we have accessible to us. And the dialogue is going to continue. We're going to continue to work collaboratively going forward, not just on enforcement, but on other issues where governments have to work together, and we're doing that.
In closing, I just want to say thank you again to Mayor Bowman for being here today. I really appreciate his presence here today and his cooperation as we move forward. I also wanted to acknowledge that today is the 103rd anniversary of a defining moment in Canadian history. That is the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and I want to say a special thank you to all our veterans, all our current service people, our sincere appreciation for what they've done for our country. And I want to say to those who may not be students of Canadian history that are thinking that they don't matter and that they can avoid any responsibility for looking after themselves or others in our province, to maybe just Google Vimy Ridge and see if they can find a little inspiration. Every generation doesn't have a chance to save a life, but Manitobans have done that throughout our history. They've given a lot for us and for each other and for our country. And now you have the chance to do the same, so do it, and don't be lighter in the pocketbook. Behave accordingly, respectfully. Happy Easter, happy Passover. See you next week.
Thank you. Merci, Miigwech.
And to you.
Thanks, everyone.